Hey folks, this is Riker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. Feel free to check out last week's episode, and make sure you have subscription notifications turned on to be alerted of new episodes. We'll start with some general gaming news before we dive into Diablo and Overwatch. Feel free to reference the timestamps in the description below to skip ahead. Now our first story is actually Blizzard related. Whether you play Diablo, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, any Blizzard game at all, this story affected you. And it's a security vulnerability that left every single Blizzard game player vulnerable. And this vulnerability was brought to light by a certain Tavis Ormandy, who's a white hat hacker. In other words, he uses his hacking powers for good and not for evil. He's currently employed by Google as a security analyst. And what he notified Blizzard and the world at large was that, quote, all Blizzard games were vulnerable to a DNS rebinding vulnerability, which allowed any website to run arbitrary code. Now, what does that mean to those of us who aren't computer scientists? Well, basically the ramification would be that if you, someone who has a Blizzard game installed, happen to visit a malicious website that is designed to exploit this security vulnerability, then it can instruct your Blizzard Update Agent, which is an application that everyone who has a Blizzard game has on their computer because it's used to keep games up to date. The website can instruct this agent to download and run anything. As an analogy, you can think of the Blizzard Update Agent as a doorman, and he's only supposed to open the door and let in Blizzard employees. However, he can be bribed with Vicodin, because he happens to have a pill addiction. So any criminal that knows his secret can also get into the building. Now before you get too worried, this story has a happy-ish ending in that Blizzard silently patched out this security vulnerability. So it's no longer something you need to be concerned about, and the white hat hacker also doesn't think that this exploit was really abused of, so odds are nothing bad happened to anyone, or at least it's pretty low odds. On to other gaming news, there might be a new Fable game in the works. According to Eurogamer, a new big-budget Fable game is in development. And as the series is known for, it will be a story and character-driven open-world action RPG. I'm actually new to the Fable series. I've just started playing the first game recently. But for those of you who are familiar with this RPG classic, what are your thoughts on this news? On to our next story, there's a Duke Nukem film in development being made by Michael Bay, and they're in talks with John Cena to be the star. So obviously this movie will be in development for 14 years, only to be released when no one cares about it anymore and then receive terrible reviews. But hey, at least it's time to kick ass and chew bubblegum. On to our next story here, and it's one of our major stories of the week, and it revolves around a huge war in EVE Online. A war that was predicted to result in $1 million worth of damage. Now we're going to simplify certain elements of this story just so that we don't have to explain fully how EVE Online works. But the gist is that 4 years ago, in 2014, the then largest EVE Online war took place, in which $300,000 worth of virtual ships were destroyed. And in EVE Online, if your ship is destroyed, poof, it's gone. You're not getting it back, you gotta buy a new one. Now, the winning faction in this war went on to basically rule the EVE universe, and its leader was perhaps the most famous EVE Online player of all time. But as he made certain questionable decisions with his powerful position as basically Emperor of EVE, fame turned to infamy, and the EVE community reached a boiling point, wanting to rebel against the Imperium. Yep, that's what the faction was called. Yes, this is basically Star Wars. So what happened was, the richest person in EVE Online, who ran an EVE gambling website to make his money, formed a coalition to take on the Imperium. And over the course of the next few months, through sheer force of money, the coalition decisively won against the Imperium, forcing a very weakened Imperium to put its tail behind its legs and retreat. Think of what happened to the Empire after Return of the Jedi. So there was a brief period of peace in the galaxy, but what happened next is that the gambling website was basically shut down by EVE's developers, and the richest man in EVE was banned. So now the coalition no longer had its huge money bank, which was its super weapon that it had used to defeat the Imperium. Now at this point, the Imperium, just like the First Order in Star Wars, is rebuilding and vowing to take revenge. Now I need to stress here that these are all people. There's no AI faction here that I'm talking about. These are all human-run organizations, human alliances, human leaders, it's its own community, it's its own universe, and that's really fascinating about EVE. I know the gameplay itself is spreadsheet simulator for most people, but hearing about it from the outside is really interesting. So both of these factions get into an arms race, with the Imperium poking at the Coalition's borders, hinting at a major invasion. Until finally, this week, the Imperium suddenly escalated a border skirmish into a full-scale invasion. Now, in the Battle of 2014, both sides had roughly 80 super capital ships, which are the most expensive ships in the game. And in total, 75 were lost, divided amongst both factions. At the time, each super capital ship was worth somewhere around $3,500. And there has not been another war in which 2 fleets of super capital ships got involved. Until this week. Both sides in this war would each have 250 super capital ships. That's 3 times as many as the War of 2014. And that's why the estimated damages for this war were at $1 million. This event received a huge amount of hype, but then after the story just kind of disappeared from the public eye. Thankfully though, PC Gamer reported on the outcome of the war, the battle that did actually take place. Over 12,000 pilots, that's over 12,000 human players, partook in this war. There were 6,000 players in the combat zone itself, with another 6,000 players brawling over supply lines and being ready on standby to come in as reinforcements. This was the biggest battle in EVE Online's history. There were over 10,000 people watching on Twitch to see the war unfold. And in a few hours, it was over, with the total estimated cost of losses at $10,000. That's several zeros smaller than $1 million. So what happened? How did this super hyped war, how did this $1 million war turn into the $10,000 skirmish? Well, basically the EVE servers just couldn't handle the load of all these players fighting each other. According to one of the generals in this war, quote, players were useless and could not do anything at all except stare at a login screen or stare at their ships, unable to do anything. And beyond the server issues, a lot of players just ran into issues themselves on their own computers because being forced to render 6,000 ships on your screen is gonna do some damage. So for a lot of players, the game just kept crashing, or they'd be stuck on loading screens forever. And for those players who did actually manage to partake in the fight, apparently ships were unresponsive and it can take minutes to process a single command like firing a gun. Twitch streamers who were broadcasting the fight couldn't even move their camera for fear of the game crashing. And possibly worst of all, one of the game's inbuilt mechanics basically made it impossible for the Imperium to win, because the focus of this war was an attempt by the Imperium to destroy a coalition citadel. And the game has a system whereby if you're not dealing continuous damage to the citadel, it eventually starts to heal and becomes invulnerable for a short time. So due to the lag, it was impossible for the Imperium to sustain the amount of damage needed to stop the citadel from going into auto-heal mode. Because of that, the Imperium didn't even bother to deploy their super capital ships, since it would have been pointless. And eventually, the Imperium decided to call the full retreat. So this is the story about how possibly the most hyped war in EVE Online history turned into the most disappointing war of EVE Online history. Now, while this story has a sad or disappointing anticlimactic ending, I just love that this sort of thing is possible, and I wish that we can have a game where the technology will be at a point where we could have these enormous, universe-altering battles. Because I think that's the most intriguing and engaging part of an MMORPG or any kind of MMO game. It's when events are driven by the community, and as a community, you can have a massive impact on shaping the universe. But what do you folks think about this story? Alright, on to Diablo news. It was announced that the current season will end on Sunday, February 11th, and the new season will start Friday, February 23rd. There has not been a PTR, so we're not expecting any balance changes or any major changes to happen. So we will get new season rewards, but apart from that, the season should be mostly the same as Season 12. Now, our next Diablo story here revolves around a little something that my buddy Leviathan stumbled upon, and he broke this story, and it's about a teaser for the Druid. Now, what he noticed was that in-game on the PTR, because the PTR did go up, I lied, I'm sorry, But the PTR went up and there was no balance changes on it. The PTR is just up simply for the purposes of testing some stuff on Blizzard's backend. But nonetheless, Leviathan got onto the PTR, and from Dank Memes, the PTR vendor, he bought one of the non-Necromancer bags on a Necromancer. And he received an item called the Muddied Parchment. Now, this has been in the game since the summer. This isn't something new, but he was probably the first person to gather a clue from this. And looking at it, it's super obvious, and it's crazy how we didn't notice this before. But basically, if you look at the Muddied Parchment, the description is, the words are illegible from the elements and what appear to be claw marks. Now, what are druids known for in Diablo 2? Elemental magic, and shapeshifting into animals with claws. Do also know that these first went up during the PTR in which the Fiaclager were added to the game. These are the wings that used to be called the Seraphim wings, but were renamed to the Fiaclager, and Fiaclager was the first druid in Diablo 3 lore, or Diablo lore rather. Now, why this has significance is because Diablo 3 developer Shaun White guided us to find this hidden clue in the Muddied Parchment. Through a series of tweets, he kept hinting at there being something hidden in the PTR, and he confirmed to Leviathan that it was the Muddied Parchment. So after Leviathan broke this story, some hype in the community started to emerge, and the game developer Shaun White tweeted the following. "Oh man, yeah, I've seen the Reddit thread, I love it, just remember what constellations are." The Reddit thread he was referencing here was clearly the one about the Druid, about Leviathan's findings. But what's curious is he almost immediately deleted that tweet, and then replaced it with the following one. "I don't know about anyone else, but I do love looking at constellations." So why tweet something and then delete it and then tweet something else that's more vague? Probably because that first clue was somehow too obvious, even though I don't know what to make of it. Now with this, is he hinting at something that's going to come next? Is he hinting at another clue we need to find? If he's talking about constellations, is he referring to the map of the stars from the Diablo 1 event? Is he talking about the cosmic wings, which kind of have constellations on them? If we're combining this with Druid lore, in the China region, as a cosmetic for sale, you do have the 6 wings, the Seraphim wings, the Fiaclager, but with the cosmic wing texture on them rather than the feathered texture. Could he be hinting that these wings are coming to the rest of the world? Is he hinting at the Ingum weapon, which has constellations drawn on it? Is he hinting at Trag'Oul, who's been described as a living constellation? Is he hinting at Ursa and Lupus, the real-world constellations that correspond to the bear and the wolf, which are forms that the druid can shapeshift into? I really don't know what to make of this. But for me, the greater question here is this a hint about Diablo 3 or the next Diablo game? Because my first thought would have been druid coming to Diablo, and back when we found the Fiaclager, I was on that hype train. I was convinced that the druid would be announced at BlizzCon 2017. But then after that hype started, community manager Brandy Camel came out and said, guys, level your expectations, there will be no announcements for Diablo at BlizzCon. She came in and deliberately anti-hyped us, and I'm glad she did. But it just seems really at odds with right before that, Shaun White was trying to get us hyped. So was the druid planned for D3 and then scrapped? Is the druid going to be the first class revealed for the next Diablo game? I really don't know what to think here. So sound off in the comments. What do you folks think? I personally feel that we're not getting anything else coming to D3, so that's why this news was very bizarre for me. And I still don't think that we're going to get the druid in Diablo 3, but I certainly think it's more likely now than I thought it was before finding out about this story. And now, possibly tying into that, a new job posting for a character artist has appeared for the Diablo team. The timing of this almost seems to indicate that this character artist is meant to come in to design the druid. But whatever the case is, again, with all these job posting, it's clear that something is coming to Diablo. And I do hope that we get that announcement at BlizzCon 2018. Or, you know, sooner. I'd be fine with sooner. On to other Diablo news. The exploit that we spoke about in our video last week has been fixed. Again, Blizzard was very fast to disable the item that caused the exploit, the Bone Ringer. Unfortunately, the people that did manage to climb the leaderboards during those few hours that the exploit was active have not been delisted from the leaderboards. They've not been banned, they do not appear to have been actioned in any way. And this is kind of disappointing because these people are topping the Necromancer leaderboards. This is an exploit that was clearly an exploit, because you can make an argument for, well, why should they be punished? They didn't know that what they were doing was an exploit. In this case, everyone absolutely knew that they were doing an exploit. This is not an exploit that you can do accidentally. You have to follow a very bizarre course of actions that you would not otherwise be doing. There's no gray area here. 100% if you did this, you knew that you were abusing an exploit. And we explained in our previous video what the exploit was. But basically, I just hope that for those people who do care about the leaderboards, for those who push the leaderboards, I'm not one of those people, but I think it's only just for those people that they don't have to compete with cheaters. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think the exploiters should be left on the leaderboards? Do you think they should be punished? And if so, how should they be punished? And then lastly, I just wanted to end with something cool in the world of Diablo. It is this Necromancer cosplay by Bio Cosplay. I'm pretty sure I saw this guy at BlizzCon. It was amazing cosplay. And it's based on the preliminary designs of the Rothma set. We saw this concept art a year previously at the BlizzCon. Blizzard ended up redesigning the Rothma set, but it's really cool to see this version come to life. Alright, on to Overwatch news. Blizzard World and the cosmetic update have arrived. Over 100 new cosmetics, including a lot of highly anticipated, really amazing skins. And this update was so big in the community that we were getting queues. There were like 7,000 people in line ahead of you, just like a real amusement park. People were waiting easily 10 minutes to get into the game. As a reminder, these cosmetics are not part of any event. They are being added to the base loot boxes, so there's no time pressure here to play on the map, to get the cosmetics, but do go in, do try it out, do check out all the sexy new skins. And there's more than skins, there's also highlight intros, there are emotes. This is possibly the largest content patch that Overwatch has ever received. And if you're a Diablo player, do go visit the Diablo side of Blizzard World. Go around, break some barrels, because you just might find yourself a legendary item. Another Easter egg was posted by Redditor KittyKai, and it could be found by approaching the basketball games as Sombra. If you approach those games with any other character, nothing happens, but with Sombra, you see that she somehow hacks the game to input her high score. On to our next Overwatch story. Here we got a little bit of a conspiracy theory going on. This is a theory developed by Redditor Talon, who did some impressive sleuthing. Now before we get to the theory, we need to remind you about Sanjay Korpal, who is a Vishkar employee that we see in Symmetra's comic. Now this went under a lot of people's radar, but we also see Sanjay in a meeting among Talon leadership in Moira's background video. And we had previously also seen him in another Talon meeting in the Masquerade comic. Now, Talonic's theory is that actor Karthik Srinivasan will be voicing Sanjay. And his evidence here is that the actor in question has done video game voice actor work before. He recently started following Andrea Toioiz, Overwatch's senior casting and voice director, on Twitter. He doesn't seem to follow anyone else at Blizzard, and he seems to be friends with Symmetra's voice actor based on Twitter exchanges. He also lives in Los Angeles, California, which is driving distance away from Blizzard's offices. And Talonic basically thinks that Sanjay will be a new hero being voiced by Karthik. I think this is an interesting theory. I think it holds some ground. I think it's more likely that Sanjay will make an appearance in the cinematic rather than be a full-fledged hero, but the possibility is there, and I turn the question to you. Do you think this theory is nonsense? What do you think? In other Overwatch news, the developers posted a community update. I'll post a link to that in the description below, but a couple interesting stats here. The first change is that ever since the new reporting system was implemented, people have been reporting 20% more often. And the second stat is that incidents of abusive chat are down 17% ever since that change. That's really nice correlation there. 20% more reports, roughly 20% less abusive chat. But what's your experience been? Do you feel that abusive chat has been declining slightly? Or do you think things are just as bad as ever? We're gonna finish up with some cool things in the world of Overwatch, starting with this ultraviolet Tracer cosplay by Aurora. Next we have this Princess Peach Widowmaker fan skin by Antonio D'Amico. We've got this Zerg Diva fan skin concept by Giovanna Ramirez. We've got this totally serious Magical Girl Genji skin by Made Out of Foam. And then lastly by Boss Logic, we have the Overwatch heroes as Marvel heroes with Iron Genji, Cyclops 76, Dragon Eye, Wonder Comrade, Doom Thanos, Winter Cowboy, and Ghost Reaper. And that's gonna wrap up today's video. Do remember to leave a comment with your thoughts on any and every story that we covered. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the development of more videos, you can support me on Patreon, where your support is immensely appreciated, and we have a variety of Patreon perks, including monthly hangouts, Q&A, behind the scenes, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.